How prepared are you? Since getting sober, I have discovered that the better I can answer this question, the better I feel. It only makes sense. Being ready for anything leads to peace of mind. The more prepared you are for any situation, the more confident you feel. We talk about the importance of mental health, but we don't really talk about the importance of security in this regard. In fact, there's a lot of talk about acceptance, as though the solution to your problems is letting go. This is the opposite of a solution. The only things that we should ever be accepting are the things that we cannot change, and we can change a lot. When I was drinking, my capacity to do anything for anyone, including myself, was greatly diminished. In sobriety, I've taken great pleasure in gaining strength, becoming someone others can rely on, becoming a strong, confident, and competent individual. I would go so far as to say my lack of competence is what contributed most to my problems. And when you say it like that, it sounds really obvious, right? But when people talk about depression and anxiety, at best they prescribe cognitive behavioral therapy. At worst, they give you a pill. No one talks about the importance of skills. No one says you can literally build self-esteem in the gym. You can gain confidence by being prepared. Because when you're not prepared, whether or not you're aware of it, you're tracking that in the back of your mind. It gives you anxiety, toxic stress, and people handle that in all sorts of terrible ways. Speaking for myself there, when you know if something pops off, you are not going to be ready. You can either ignore this and push it down into your subconscious where it festers and fucks with you, where it creates a baseline mood of unease, a constant, just steady stream of angst. Just soft enough to ignore, but persistent enough to mess with your performance, disrupt your productivity and your mental health. Unfortunately, this is not what they think when people hear the word prepper. Most people don't think of someone just trying to relieve their baseline anxieties about the world and their place in it. The word prepper has a lot of baggage, and it's associated with conspiracy theorist and tinfoil hat. Most of us don't associate the word prepper with people just trying to relieve their baseline anxieties about the world, wanting to be prepared for natural disasters, conflict. We think of prepping itself as the anxious act, not a response to it. These are simply people who've gone further down the path than the rest of us to assuage their anxieties about their lack of preparedness. We have the same anxieties that they do. They are just perhaps more conscientious, more willing to do something about them. So why the shade? Why do we look sideways at people who stockpile dried food and keep generators in their basements? What is the problem with the bunker? Being too prepared? I don't think any of this is being conspiratorial. I think it's just being prepared, more prepared. Like, if we can all agree that we need an earthquake kit and a plan, we agree that this is smart, this is being prepared. The prepper is just further down the same path. And if we can also agree that that earthquake kit probably ain't shit, and that plan probably doesn't get you very far, well then why the stigma about someone who recognizes these insufficiencies and does something about them? I think it's unfair, and we need to correct the record about prepping. The only thing conspiratorial is the fact the interest in being prepared should be looked at sideways at all. Like, that makes you wonder, who doesn't want you to be prepared? Again, Occam's razor. Most likely it's just people who themselves are not prepared. They don't want to feel bad. They don't want to know that there's those out there who are ready for anything when they are not. The old crabs in the bucket hypothesis. But it does make you wonder if there's a bigger agenda for people to not be self-sufficient. That should be the conspiracy, if there is one. Today we live compartmentalized lives. We live in big filing cabinets in the sky and order Uber Eats. We are all skilled in very narrow ways. The lack of broad skills means that we must rely on each other heavily, which is not a bad thing. It's good to look out for one another, but this creates complex supply chains. Recently, we saw a situation in which the fragility of these supply chains was exposed. We saw how quickly people snap back to their lizard brain. Very quickly, in an emergency, we become very self-interested. Politeness goes out the window. People stop being neighbors. You start hoarding toilet paper at the first whiff of conflict. Something bigger comes along and the rules go out the window, and you most likely are not prepared. I'm not prepared, and it stresses me out. But the more I build a diverse set of skills that will help me in an emergency, the more I acquire hard assets that will help me and have utility beyond currency in an episode of hyperinflation. The more I learn to grow and hunt my own food, the better I feel about myself. It's the same feeling I got when I got sober and people could rely on me again. I think it's useful to remember, if your concern is others, you are of no use to anyone if you're of no use to yourself. How can you look after anyone if you can't look after yourself? This is my understanding of prepping. It's not the bunker or the half-assed earthquake kit. It's a revolt against compartmentalization. The more you can insulate yourself from the massive ripples, it will cause great disturbance throughout society. From a small conflict in one area of a complex and compartmentalized supply chain, the happier you will feel, and the lower your baseline anxiety will be. The solution is to cultivate broad skills. Plant a garden, learn to hunt, and get prepared. I understand the limiting factors, really. Many of us plug our cars in and go up to the 20th floor of a high-rise where we have our food delivered. All this stuff, all this preparedness, it doesn't come overnight. It hasn't for me. I don't have the pedigree. My dad was like a writer, a creative person. I grew up in a city. My brother and I are building practices like hunting from the ground up. And from the ground up, the learning curve is steep and it requires great investment. But you don't need much to get started. You don't need a full-size garden for this. You start by growing a couple herbs and vegetables in a couple pots by the window. This is how it starts. This is how you progress further down the path of being prepared, thus being independent, and thus being more happy, and thus being a stronger, more confident individual. I don't have a bunker. I don't have a tinfoil hat, but I am a prepper, and it's been a huge part of my sobriety and subsequent recovery.